Kristine Hoffman.
And I'm Joann, Basista. We're both Mays, who lived here for almost our entire life until we got married.
And before you, your house on the bay belonged to?
It belonged to our grandparents first.
And their names were?
Alfred and Amelia.
And then when Amelia died in 1948, my grandfather gave the house to my dad in 1949, and he lived there with my mother, Chris, until both of them have passed away as well. So it came down to us. And there's 5 of us. There were 5 brothers and sisters of John, and there were...
Moms, they had like 7.
Right, Mom had 7.
And you were saying that the house, for people who may not be able to place the house, your grandfather built it?
Yes, our grandfather built it around 1940. He had a boatyard next door, and
which is where
the motel was.
Okay.
And I do know that one of the watchmen was by the name of Mr. Fox. We all knew Mrs. Fox, who had tons of cats.
Yeah, Annie Fox.
Annie, okay. And it was actually a boathouse. And a lot of the houses that are along here actually were boathouses at one point, where Welkers or
Cheney's house
live now. The front part of that was originally a boathouse owned by Ed Kerr. And the house that was Muller's on Sumner, that also was a boathouse. So on the bay side, a lot of people had boathouses that they would either make a pier, and it's one of the pictures, remember the kids jumping off on the diving board?
Oh, remember at the boatyard.
Right, where we just saw the pier. That apparently a lot of people had piers because what was between our house and Welker's, Cheney's, were cement blocks that we used to see, and that apparently was an actual cement pier that they would have tied the boats up to. So that part of the coastline was marshy, and the other side would have been sandy.
Huh. Now, did you two learn to swim in the bay, or did you?
Oh, yeah.
That seems to be a...
You had no choice. I mean, I would have been 6 months the first year, and they put a life preserver on you, because if you fell overboard, you know, it wasn't like now everybody has fences up and things.
Right.
You just, you live by the water, you learn to swim. So everybody learned to swim. And our middle sister, Barb, I remember them saying, you can swim, and she's like, no, I can't. And she wore the life preserver so long, it literally floated off before she realized she could swim without the life preserver. So.
Yes, that's us with our life jackets on.
Oh, I can't see. Well, we're going to have to scan some of these great pictures. So they didn't tie a rope around you or anything to keep you from... The current must have been challenging.
I mean, you just kind of knew that you stayed close to the pier or the bulkhead, and there was always ladders. At one time, even from our like jungle gym set, it had a slide. So our dad put the slide. We had that, so you could go down the slide and go into the water that way. And
as long as you kept putting water on it, because it was hot.
Yeah.
It was metal.
Oh. Did you fish or
Oh,
crab?
yes.
We fish.
Oh boy, we have fish stories.
well, there's one of my flounders.
Ta-da! And I've heard stories of, it was a lot easier to catch fish. There were more flounders, or do you think?
So, I think things really changed after '62.
Oh, the storm.
Some of the things that we used to catch, you just didn't after the '62 storm.
Huh.
This was Joe Casper, who kept his boat at the shore house, and Joe knew where the big flounders were.
So he was the person to know.
Yes, he came down every weekend.
Weekend.
Yes, and this is him actually in that picture with me. He's clamming, is what he's doing on the side there also.
And his last name was Joe
Casper. And he was from Philly, worked A&P?
Unity.
Grocery store, but we were always told that he kind of came with the house. So whether he kept his boat there when our grandfather had the boatyard and initially bought the house.
I always wondered if Grandpa actually built those boats.
I have no idea on that, but
it might have gotten, And because Grandpa's family actually still lived in Philadelphia, you know, we're never sure about, you know, how that relationship came about, because my grandfather, who lived in Philadelphia, then moved to National Park, and from National Park, then they moved down here. We thought they didn't come until quite late, but we found tax records that they actually had been here since 1923.
Wow. And now there was a period when your grandfather was involved with shipbuilding for the government?
Yes,
To-
during the war, part of W.A. Robinson in Ipswich, that would have been where he did that. He had been asked to come up there and work. I don't know what happened. He only lasted 1 year there, and he came back here. And the letters and things that I have, he asked the government if he could help, and they said they would let him know if he could do something to help them out. But it didn't seem like they ever actually did that, although he made a lot of ships. They seemed to be more private ones. When he worked for Mathis, they had a lot of ships that were naval and things.
And who caught the shark?
That was our dad.
Oh, your dad. Okay.
Yes.
And that was
And that was a thresher shark.
John May.
Thrasher, I guess you pronounce it thrasher.
Yeah.
Thrasher shark has this big long tail that sticks out of the water. And again, they feared for it to have been in the bay. It probably was hurt or sick to begin with, but you know, different people kept saying they were seeing a shark. So as it went along the bulkhead and it's got its tail there,
Because a thresher shark has its tail stick up.
so he grabbed it and
He grabbed the fish,
by
the shark by the tail.
And then I think actually some people from the motel came over because obviously it's heavy, and they got ropes
Probably
around
didn't
it.
realize how big it was.
Yeah, and pulled it up on the dock. So then it was out on the end of the dock, and everybody
It was
came
quite
to
an
see
attraction.
it.
Well, how big would you say?
Well, again, the shark itself was as long as the
First couple
well,
sections
I'm
of the
thinking
pier.
the what you sit on,
The benches.
the benches, and then its tail stuck
Probably
out
at least
in
10 feet, don't you think? But I worked for Mildred's at the time, and I'm walking home, and they go, "Your dad caught a shark." And we're like, "Big deal, Dad caught a shark,"
Yeah.
you know. And all these people are like running through our yard, and I'm like, "What the heck is going on?" And I mean, all night long, people had to come and see this thresher shark. It was like, you know, something amazing that people came to see. So, and then the Coast Guard came and wrapped it up and
towed it out and stuff. But it was more interesting, some of the articles, because like the one said that that he got a rope around it and he drug it all the way around to the ocean, and you're like to the point, you're like, obviously they have no idea about the island, that he would have to have been jumping from pier to pier to pier to get all the way around. So some of those was
Those are
amusing
real
to
fish
us,
stories.
Yes. And this is what was in the
well,
newspapers.
then we had people that brought pliers. They wanted to take the teeth out of the shark, and like stuff like that.
Yeah, but the Coast Guard took care of it.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
because
they-
it would smell, because there were flies and everything. It was dead, so.
Yes,
But-
that was one of our exciting times.
And you two grew up and were raised on the island. And
Yes.
so where did you go to school?
I went for kindergarten, it was Ocean City, and then after that, Upper Township for elementary school, and you went there till 8th grade, and then you went back to Ocean City High School.
Because Upper Township didn't have a high school. In the middle school, there really wasn't a separate middle school. We were K-8 all at which is the primary school, is Marmora.
And how did you get to school? You were saying,
Oh, well, when I first went,
Me for kindergarten.
did you do that too?
Kindergarten, as long as when we went to Ocean City, as elementary school, you were on a public bus. It was an actual public bus that
Did he
through.
stop at the train station with you? When I went, Charlie McGinnis, who came from Seattle, the bus came down, picked us up, and most of the kids that lived in Strathmere at that time were high school. So I was the only kindergartner that we would go over. He would drop the men off at the train station to catch the train to Philly. Then he went up to the high school and dropped everybody off. Now my grandmother happened to live in Ocean City. So she would walk over, pick me up, because there was otherwise I was this little kindergartner that, nobody was there to meet me. So my grandmother would take me over to Wesley Avenue, which which is where the elementary school was. Then she'd pick me up at 11. It was either that or I had to go to kindergarten twice because there was no way to come home. And my grandmother would pick me up, and then she would walk me back to the high school when it let out. And one year, because there were no cell phones or anything, we had a snowstorm, which down here, it was either you had a lot of snow or you just had a little. And she walked us over, and no bus, no kids. And we're like, what's going on? Well, they had called school early, but there was no way of letting my grandmother know. So I had to sleep over and go into school the next day because there was no way to get me back home to Strathmere. So that was an adventure.
So who were your friends? What families and friends some old-time families you can remember?
Well, I was going to say in my class I had Philip Riordan, Charlie Schaefer, Rhonda Keys, and their father was in was a Coast Guard, and he was at a station in Cape May, but they lived right near the water tower. Who else? I'm trying to think.
Billy and Patty.
No, they weren't in my class. Henry Barrett III. He was in my class, and I know he and his sister Valerie lived with their grandparents up in the Point.
Up on the Point. Yeah.
And then probably about 4th grade, maybe 5th grade, they moved, I know, with their father to Hawaii, because I remember in the beginning getting, like a Hawaiian Christmas card that he sent and stuff, but...
Yeah, I didn't have anybody in my class.
From Strathmere.
Yeah. I mean, the families, either the kids were a lot older,
right,
or they were a lot younger. There wasn't anybody that was my age there.
And just for time references, what year did you graduate from Ocean City High School?
I was 1970.
70?
67.
67, okay. And what else you're sitting there with?
Oh, well, these
goodies.
Again, it was just some pictures. I know Joann had mentioned about some of the people that were here in the summertime, like the Garrows and the Blacks, but then also were the Kinklers.
Oh.
And they lived above the little garage right across from Garrows. And Evelyn was my godmother. So I have, again, this is a picture of Bert and Evelyn holding me.
Holding you.
When
he was a teacher in Philadelphia, and they would come down. And most people, even the trailer park, they came for
and that's my graduation picture with my godmother Evelyn.
So your family kept in touch, obviously, and she was part of your
Yes.
Your life. That's so
Yes.
nice.
I mean, she was there every year for my birthday. She would come down. I think our other relationship with these people who were here in the summertime was the fact that the week between Christmas and Thanksgiving, or Christmas and New Year's, we would go and visit them. And my mom made her own fruit cake, about 24 of them.
Oh my.
And just tremendous number of different kinds of cookies. And we would go and visit them and see the the Christmas lights. I mean, that
Right.
time with the row homes and everything. And in particular, I think of with Mario, who lived across the street from us in the red brick house across from us here at the shore, was the fact that you always had these wonderful Italian desserts. I mean, that was the thing.
And they would bring us, when they would come down for the summer, they would bring us Italian desserts and bring them over, which is something we wouldn't have had. I mean, things here were pretty vanilla. This is Mario. And across from him actually was Paul Diotono.
Right.
And he was with the City Council of Philadelphia, and he had a house there on the corner for quite a while. So, I mean, and people would just come down. I mean, like the trailer park, most of them, the wives came down with their kids. Dad worked all week, and then, they would be down on the weekend. And the same, with these. So you would go up to the beach. I mean, nobody ever said, oh, you're too young to be on the beach by yourself. You just, it was just such a safe place that nobody ever gave it a thought. The one thing I was thinking about is how Halloween is different here than other places. when you have Halloween here, because there's so few families and everything, we always Halloweened on the closest Saturday to Halloween. We never went out unless Halloween fell on that, because there'd be nobody, hardly anybody to, to
Right.
get treats from. And it was great because people who had come down hadn't expected us to be trick-or-treating, so they didn't have much. So most times you got money, which was really nice.
Yeah.
But
I mean, a dime was a lot you could buy, an ice cream cone for the dime back then, so.
But some people would be having pretzels, and they would just dump the whole thing of pretzels in there, which wasn't much fun kind of thing. But we would be out till like 11 o'clock at night. You never thought anything of it, You'd walk the whole island and come back.
And you went everywhere. So you went to Mildred's, you went to the Coast Guard station, you went in the 2 bars.
Right. Twisties and the Duville. Bald Point, anybody that was there.
And anybody that had a light on. George McGoy, you had to do some kind of song or dance to get your treat from him.
Carmona's lived up there then too.
Mm-hmm.
The school teacher, Mrs. Carmona?
She was my piano teacher.
Okay.
She might have taught school. I didn't know
Was it
that.
Catherine Carmona?
Catherine, right. And her husband was in charge of the Coast Guard station at one time. So that's... Although, when I looked up the census, she actually lived on Bayview Drive for a while. So I'm not quite sure whether she came and they came together or what, but they are in the 1940 census up there.
So where could you spend a dime in Strathmere?
Bilotta's.
Yeah.
Where?
Bilotta's.
Oh, come on. I've heard of Ernie's. I've heard of the Village Market.
Oh.
Now, where are you?
You're down by the post office. There used to be a gas station there.
Ernie's.
Italian. What is it? The
Yeah,
Italian?
Or Harker's?
Fontana's.
Yeah, it was Harker's and
Well, the
was
front end
Ernie's.
of that that's closest to the post office,
Okay.
Gobbs Whitcamp actually was in there.
Okay.
And they had the old Coke machine that you could, the freezer or refrigerator kind of thing, you'd stick your coin in and get your soda. Nothing that our parents let us do. But they had, area that you sat there and you could talk, and there were always people stopping in. And there was gas out front too, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Anything.
one time there was
But-
gas pumps.
But that was known as Bilotta's.
Yeah, I think one of the things people would ask us at times, what do you do in the winter? Because they think, as soon as you hit, Labor Day, like everything is just
Right.
closed, and you were kind of like, well, what do you do in the winter? I mean, we do the same things. I mean, even in the summertime, you didn't have per se a grocery store, so you were going off the island where you went, usually you went to Ocean City because you had, more choices and stuff. But, I mean, again, because you didn't have the traffic, you could ride your bike anywhere, on the street, especially on the back road. You could, roller skate. Again, you didn't have to worry about the cars. The one house, I don't know, what was the house that had the cement driveway that you went up? Because you could, that gave you a nice thing to, when you're on your roller skates, you could come down that onto the street.
I'm not seeing that anymore. It was just like a big, cement walk that, you went down. But
It's not there anymore. We used to ice skate because there used to be empty lots in towns that just had your like cat and nine-tail, kind of things and whatever else, but it would fill with water. And if it got cold enough, it would freeze. That give you an area that you could skate on.
our parents liked to bowl. They would go to Sea City and bowl. There was a movie house there where we would go to Ocean City
Ocean City
to see
yeah.
the movies.
So about how many year-round kids were in town, would you say, or families?
Well, let's see.
Can you say?
I'm trying to think. When was 62? Was there about 100 people?
Yeah, I guess.
About that, maybe.
You had Schaefer's and Riordan's and
Towsers,
right?
hers,
Whipcam's,
Whipcam's.
Andrus's.
Mhm.
There were a couple families of that, but Eddie was the one that we knew.
Speaking of 62, how did you make out with the hurricane? What did your family do?
We were flown out by helicopter.
Yeah, I mean that could be
Really?
kind of our other story, I guess.
Our brother had just been born in February the 1st, and that hit March the 1st.
Oh my goodness.
And so he was only a month old. So
This is your brother,
John.
John.
So they flew us out, and my dad worked for the electric company.
Flew you out by helicopter,
Helicopter.
from.
it was they had flown in. They took us actually the night before during the middle of the night or whatever. The Coast Guard came around when the tide was down and said that they'd be back, and they were picking everybody up and taking you to the Coast Guard
Picking
station.
you up by truck? Or
Yes,
by,
by one of their trucks, and they took you to the Coast Guard station. And you weren't supposed to take your animals with you, which we did. Our doggie was, up in the bathroom with food, etc. But I think that was part of the reason with people bringing the animals and things that my mom then, when they had flown in water, and I believe they had flown out one gentleman from the point, sticks in mind, was somebody that had a medical problem.
Right.
And she had asked what would be the possibility of, us flying out, and they felt they had this is kind of later in the day, but felt they had enough time to come back one more time, and they landed on the bridge approach, and everybody, they put life jackets on you, and the only thing else I remember on that is the guardman that was back with us saying to my mom, if something happens, you take care of yourself, that the baby is my responsibility. And off we went, and they flew you over to Ocean View, behind the fire station, the ballpark. And then they took you to the fire station there, and they had a board. I guess they wrote your name, how many of you were there, and where you were going. So if somebody was looking for you,
okay.
they would have an idea of where you went. And they basically would take you any place as long as they didn't have to cross bridges. So like my mom wanting to go to Summers Point, that they wouldn't do. So we ended up, in Eldora? Because that's where our maternal grandparents, were at that time and stuff. And we were out of the house for about a month.
Right.
And was there a lot of damage to your house?
Not really damage. You mean, again, we had certainly, water in the house.
What we had seen is they had never really had water in the house. So we kept watching. I mean, you're watching it all the time. The interesting thing was that later on we found out when we were brownies, I think we went to, there was an Air Force base exactly across from us, which is now Osprey Cove, I think is what it's called. And
An Air Force base was over there?
Yes. And they actually showed us that they could see this storm sitting there, but because it was an Air Force base, they weren't allowed to tell anybody that this storm, what it was really doing, because it was a hurricane that shouldn't have been.
It's a nor'easter.
Nor'easter. Which is what a hurricane is. They just give them names. This one just sat there for 3 days. But our father worked for the electric company. Electric company was really good, and what they did is they put him up at a motel, and then any truck that was coming in, they put him on. And when he got in, he was able to, they just said, go up and check on the house, whatever. So he walked up to the house and got the dog and brought that out and brought clothes and things for us. But before we had actually gone out, because the Coast Guard hadn't gotten their supplies and things, they didn't have a lot of food, so they went over to what we call the boathouse, which was Rosenbach's place. And Dad went up inside, and they had like pancake mix and things like that. So he got things, put them on a life preserver, because water was still kind of high, and he floated it over and brought it over to the Coast Guard station, so they had food because they hadn't gotten their supplies.
The Coast Guard station in town.
Right.
Yes, I heard this story from someone else, that they had started running out of food and water after a couple of days.
I mean, that was why they were flying the water in and stuff. So this is a picture.
So I'm just getting this. Your mother then has to get a newborn, and you, how many other? You three little girls out all by yourself, and your father's offshore at work.
Well, we all,
we all went together.
Yeah,
your dad
we
went.
all flew out
Oh, okay.
together. But then we went and stayed at our grandmother's, and he went
And he
down
came
to
back.
Cape
Okay.
Courthouse because he worked for the electric company. This would show you the front of the house
Goodness.
where the water was.
Yeah.
Yeah, now this one I think it's a little blurry, but that's showing again where we had trees in the front.
Yeah. You have those beautiful flowers and from the street side too now. I've always admired your house.
That would have been the back where the bay is.
Looks like the beach.
And again, this is just showing two of the houses, you know, in town, the damage that happened to them.
Do we know what street? This
I
is
could, the one actually, which now is, if you come off the bridge and make a left, it's like, it almost looks like they took, which they did, the top half of the house and then built underneath it.
Yeah, there were two identical houses
Yeah.
that looked like that were large, and that was all that was left. So they literally cut off the bottom and then, you know, moved the other one over.
In the videos, are there the pictures of the storm? Because I can say on that,
Yeah, I don't
there's
have- I can
ones
bring
that I think of because her dad was able to, you know, get in to see out. I mean, some of the first pictures that were actually taken because of the electric company, you know, coming
Sure.
in and everything.
That had a wry sense of humor. So, like, and I don't have that, but I can certainly get that. You can make copies of that one too. He and his friends, because he would walk in each time they came in, he helped the Coast Guard guys out. They ended actually taking his car apart. He had a 52 Chevy that floated. It actually, and they said, hey, we got nothing to do. They took his car apart for him and cleaned it all and got it in working order. When it came back, there was still seaweed hanging out of the tailpipe. But there used to be huge places that the nuns would come down to in the summer, and they would stay, and they had a big place, and it looked like a big giant had squashed it and just put the roof left on top, and that's pretty much what you saw all the way down here. But there was we have pictures of somebody sitting on a toilet with an umbrella, and they're, you know, that was Dad's sense of humor, that, you know, he got one of his friends to do that.
laugh or cry, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was really sad. I mean, it took a long time for it to come back. I mean, just scraping things up and then building dunes and things, but
Yeah, I don't know if people realize that the motel that you have, right, we knew it as a Dolphin Motel. I think now maybe it's condos or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was on the other side of the street. And, you know, you kind of wonder, do they know that, you know, that it had been there? And again, I mean, you had your houses that were on the marsh side that actually ended up in the marshes. And then the ones on the ocean side, obviously being pushed across, you know, across the street and
because
everything.
most of the houses, you know, they're sitting on pilings. There's not a whole lot that's holding on to them.
Right.
And one of the stories that we had about our grandparents' original house up on Whittier, we had John's wife, Mary, who was his sister-in-law, had written this to tell us that in the 1944 storm, which apparently was the other really big one that they had, supposedly even German prisoners were brought in to help clean up after the storm, but that the house had floated off of its pilings. And her line was, because he was a boat builder, all they had to do was roll it back and put it back up on the pilings. That even the plaster and everything inside, nothing had cracked on it because he was such a good boat builder, that things were so well built that they literally put it on rollers, rolled it back and put it up again, kind of thing. So.
And you said kind of the same thing for the house on the bay, that he had sealed it so well or had constructed it so well?
Right, the wood and everything, whatever they were finishing the inside of the boats with, because they're out in the water all the time, obviously they don't want mold and things, and that's what the house is finished, the inside. So it's white cedar, right?
That's what we think it is, yeah.
So the living room is white cedar and an oak floor, and literally they wipe it up. The mud would be in. You'd have all kinds of ugly things that were left there when the water dropped out. But literally just washing it up with getting the mud and everything off, and it just came back to its natural self. So, it was the kind of thing that you kept wondering, well, what's going to happen with it? But nothing really did.
Now, what happened with Sandy? Your house got hit pretty hard again then, didn't
We probably had more water than with Sandy than we did in '62.
Really?
Yeah.
Inside the house
Yes.
and under?
Yeah. I mean, I think inside was what, 2 feet? 24 inches inside, so you figure you had, and again, you have that brick porch that you're going up, 3 steps, so it's that plus then
Wow.
the 24 inside. But again, because of the way the house has been built, I mean, the floors don't buckle, even though they're wood floors. They're pegged, and however they were built, and like the boat,
Oh.
the floors are still good. The dining room is half paneled in mahogany, which again would have been a wood that they used for paneling the yachts and things. So,
Anything else in town that was built by a May?
There were, my grandparents' house was on Whittier. That was where they first
On the
built.
beach block or the bay?
On the beach.
Okay.
Actually, the first ones were actually on the other side of where the dunes were. And then as they kept losing beach, that was obviously moved back. My tax records show that at some point it was underwater. Sometimes they had to pay taxes and sometimes they didn't. But they had a smaller house there. And my grandfather's brother and sister each bought or built houses or had them built on, what do you think that was?
Willard.
Willard on the other side. And then our Uncle John, he actually built 2 other ones in that same general vicinity. I'm not quite sure, what was the reason that he changed, but their kids used to come over and fish on our dock. I remember the one time Barbara had actually gotten a fish hook in her leg, and my mom wanted to, it was still hooked to the pole, and Mom wanted to cut it off, and they went running down the street and to go home, and it was like, I mean, she was very upset that, she couldn't take care of it, but they had been, fishing and fooling around, and so somebody got the fish hook stuck in them, but obviously they were no worse for wear, so they came back and fished again.
I'd say the other thing would be with the church in the summertime had Bible school, and again would be actually for us our great Aunt Mary. So it would be our grandfather's brother John, who built the houses up there. His wife Aunt Mary, she had the best felt board that she told the Bible stories on, and you just always look forward to having the Bible school with Aunt Mary.
And you had told a funny story about the church when the train used to go by. Was it the trolley or the train?
I think it was a train that they said that when on Sundays when the train would be coming in, the minister would be saying his sermon, and as the train got closer, because they're all sitting there, they're actually shaking as the train goes by, and it's very noisy and everything, so he would stop his sermon. They would all sort of rumble by, and once the train left, then he would pick up the sermon and keep going. So I had found a pamphlet from a church bulletin where my grandmother actually sang in the church, and her and Grandpa both were, people that worked out in the church. He was very involved. His family were Methodist and part of the Odd Fellows group, and it's one of the things that we've been able to follow them back to, find places that they lived, and that's how we knew National Park already, but also in the Kensington area they lived at some point.
And your grandmother was a knitter for the Red
Well,
Cross?
during the war, she worked with the Red Cross, and apparently the ladies got together and they would, rolling bandages and things to send. And most of them had somebody from here that were in the service. I mean, my dad and his sister Jane both were in the service. Teddy Carruthers, whose family owned what was Thompson's store for a while. I don't know what it is. It's a real estate or
To
something.
me, I always
now.
called it the Green Store.
The Green Store, right? Teddy Carruthers, his family lived there. He actually died in the war. I haven't found enough information to really know about that, other than he didn't make it back, kind of thing. But there were, families that had members that were in the service. So these women got together on a regular basis.
From Strathmere.
From Strathmere, right? They were.
Do you have the picture? I mean, there
Yeah,
was a picture because I think Delphine Quinn, I think was.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what her. O'Hare.
Did you know the Ravdens? He was a surgeon during the war.
The name I know, but
Burgess, and Elizabeth Burgess was her dad. He was friends with Rosenbach, so and I know that during the war he was. Wow, this I don't know if this will show up,
Yeah,
but this
I
is a
don't
great one of the. And which one is your grandmother? Do you remember?
I'd have to look at it.
You'd have to look at it again. Of course, you can't tell I have it.
Let's see who we have in here. We have Carolyn McCullough. You'll see her, Delphine Quinn, Millie May would have been this one. Ella Bird, I don't know. She is.
Which one is your grandmother then?
The back row.
The back row on the end.
Second
Oh, second one. Oh, right under the
Kind of
cross.
like the little tiny person.
Yeah, she is
Yeah,
little.
she was small.
And how about this one? This looks like a seal or a sea lion that's washed up.
Oh, no, that's her dachshund.
Oh, it's a dog. Okay, I don't have my glasses on. And who is this?
That's her grandfather.
That's your grandfather.
That's Alfred.
Alfred May.
Yes.
And his dachshund, excuse me. Teach me to wear my glasses. So I've also heard one of the things people reminisce about is how high the dunes were and playing up at the point in the dunes. Did you?
Well, we had a sister whose birthday was in June. She always got to have her birthday at the dunes.
Really?
We would have campfire. They would have a campfire.
You used to be allowed to have fires
Sure.
on the beach.
And then you were talking about the gardens before. That's the gardens,
Oh,
and that's the boatyard.
Oh, the boatyard is gone. The
Boatyard.
motel that replaced it is gone.
Partly in, they keep saying 1940 it was gone, but I found pictures later than 40. So I imagine the main building part, he wasn't able to do that. And when his wife died in 1948, his youngest daughter was only like 10. So he ends up moving to Florida, actually, and builds a couple houses down there as well.
Wow.
But all the things that they had left, they had wood left, they had nails and things, we found stored in the attic. I mean, all the little pegs that Dad had to put in the floor, because they would use, they would put the screw in and then these pegs would go across it. We found all of those kinds of things up in the attic that, whatever he salvaged out of that before he sold it off, they
Yeah.
stored. So.
Now, for most of the summer, you've had a display in the library's entranceway case about your parents.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about?
Well, I think the biggest thing was always, if you want to call it, as we called it, their love story. The fact that when my dad going into the service had bought an engagement ring, which he had given to his parents, that should anything happen to him, they were to give, our mother the ring, of which they did receive a telegraph that they were missing in action, that the plane had been shot down. And so they do give her the ring. And I forget, so many days later,
about a
a week, that they do get a new telegraph that, they've been found and everything. But it's the fact that, she believed that the whole time, that he was okay and everything. So there's pictures of her, with the ring and et cetera.
Where was he shot down? Do you know?
Linz, Austria. At that time, again, when you look at old maps, the borders, kept
Right.
changing, whose country.
And
it
was he in the Air
He was
Force,
Air
did you say?
Yeah.
Army Air Corps.
He was a gunner and photographer. Partly because really when he graduated from high school, he was still short. He was like 5'9". When you see as far as when he was, went into the service. But her dad was 6 foot.
Oh, so he
Because-
kept growing.
Yeah, but because he was small, he could fit in that little space.
And that's how he became a gunner.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Partly had to be because of his size
Right.
and things. So that was, it was interesting to me. It's, the newspaper articles, in reference to them. And obviously they had met at Ocean City High School. I don't know if we have actually, we have different pictures.
How long were they married?
We got married in 1948, and our mom died in 1973. So, I'm trying to think what else we have.
And it's nice, you two are you sound to be the family historians, but it's also nice that things were saved for you. You have a deed from one of their properties.
Yeah, it's been funny because when we were cleaning out things and looking through pictures and stuff, Chris and my daughter actually gave me a subscription to Ancestry when it first started coming out. So we had one letter of a relative, not on the May side, that had fought in the Civil War. And that's what got us started. And once you start there, then you start branching out and looking at the other ones. So we've been able to follow quite a bit of the May family, where they came, and this good or bad of it, they use the same names. So there's always a John, there's always an Alfred, of which we have brothers that are John and Alfred.
Right.
My dad had a brother, Alfred, who passed away when he was 3, and of course his name was John, and then his grandfather was an Alfred, and he had a brother that was John. So there were, there are just some semblances that are always the same coming into there. But I don't know.
If you had to sum up your life in Strathmere in a couple of words or sentences, what do you think are some of your best memories or descriptors?
It was safe and idyllic. I mean, it was just a wonderful place to grow up. You made it what you wanted. I mean, there were no frills here. We had to go off the island, and I have to laugh because when I live in North Jersey now, when you say you had to go offshore, they think you're in the water. I'm like, no, we went shopping, and they're like, how do you shop? And like, no, offshore to us, we're on the shore. Offshore is to the west, not to the east, kind of thing. So it's interesting, things like that. But it was just a safe, nice place that, you could go anywhere. People knew who you were, and, people greeted you all the time. I don't think that part's really changed. I don't think people know each other as well. But
No.
but when you had the boat parade and everything like that, I mean, you walk down the street, everybody's having a good time, everybody's nice to each other.
And a lot of the things with the boat parade, let's face it, they're inside things. You got to
Yes.
know things, what's going on in town,
Absolutely.
in the county, or whatever. I mean, again, I always liked. I think again, as far as because you're living here at the shore. September is still a beautiful time. You could come home from school, if it was high tide, you jumped overboard. If it wasn't, you walked a block, you're at the beach, And I think as you got older, it was more the fact of sitting out on the dock, whether it be in the morning, you got your cup of coffee, and just the sounds, if you want to say, the water, the boats, the people, and again, fortunate because we live on the bay side, the sunset. I mean, that's just...
If you look through our photography, our albums, I remember we would come down, even after we had gotten married, and our kids came down. Our kids have all worked in the area and everything, but you'd be out there taking, it's like, oh, the sun's setting, and we'd race out to, take pictures. And I remember my brother saying to me, but you already have pictures. I'm like, but this is a different one, And if you look through my albums at home, there's like picture after picture, but it was just something so beautiful to be able to see that.
I think the other thing that has changed is with the bay, because back in our time, you did not have no wake. They water skied in the bay. You had the draggers that went out.
What's a dragger?
That's a big fishing boat they have the nets, and they would come from this would be before '62. They were in Sail City, and they would come up and to go out through the inlet. They would come through our bay
with a net on it, and literally they would put the pole down when they got out into the ocean.
But your grandfather built some draggers,
and they would drag it along the ground of the bottom of the ocean, and then you pull it up, and you've got, whatever fish and things that you had. And there were always 3 that went through that you could set your watch by. They would go through in the morning, and then they would come back in the afternoon.
But they made great waves. So
so that was a good thing.
That was a good thing. So you got your inner tube, and see if you could could you stand on the inner tube and make it over the waves, or here come the waves that you would dive into, that type of thing. The Schaefer's had a party boat, so that was something else that, would go out, and sometimes I think they did rides that they
Well, we
would go
always
back
had
through
the
the area.
church. There was always one evening in the summer that you could get on the boat and, from people from the Methodist Church, and they would get on the boat, and he would take you out into the ocean and turn around and come back. Because then his boat was actually here in Strathmere, not in Seattle, the way it is now. But they can't get out anymore. Once that closed in,
And you had Horace with the airplane boat. That was another big thing
Oh,
to
tell
hear.
me about Horace and his airplane boat. We've heard about this.
Well, again, it was just the sound that it made, and usually, you like right now would be a good time because the water's over the meadows, and he could go over them, or you would see, with your binoculars, you could see like the spray that would be behind the boat, so you could see where he was between, the different areas of the meadows and stuff.
we've never seen anything like
Yeah,
that.
you just as soon as you heard, you go, oh, it's the airplane boat. Which I think as we got much older, it was hearing. I think they call them the scar boats. That have that
right.
diesel engine.
Yeah.
Which again, because of no wake, they're just chugging along till they get past that last sign, and of that, and then you hear them. But
The best was because there was the inland waterway behind us, we could watch the boats go north
Right.
in the spring and south in the wintertime. But every so often, somebody obviously wasn't reading their charts correctly because they didn't want to go out into the ocean.
Oh, right. So they stayed.
So they wanted to stay there, but they would come out into our bay, and they would be going down the bay, the bathing beauties and everything would be on the front of it, they're looking really, we're all like, well, when do they find out when they get under the bridge, that they're out in the ocean?
they usually didn't even get under because the bridge a lot of times had to open for them. So they're kind of saying, I guess always having some kind of conversation that maybe this isn't where you want to be because you'll be in the ocean, out in the ocean.
But going back, you wouldn't see anybody, they're like, maybe they won't notice us.
But they were big. That was a big thing, size of the boats.
How about the time the Coast Guard pulled the back transom off the boat? Remember that?
Off of your boat?
No.
No.
Somebody had taken their boat out, and when the tide goes down, they're not paying attention to the markers, and they got this boat stuck on one of the marsh things. So the Coast Guard was actually in Strathmere at the time. So they hooked their boat up and pulled the back end of the boat right off.
Obviously not built by the May.
No, that wasn't built by them. But, it's just that, and my dad liked sailing, and his father, there's pictures of him in a sailboat. So we had a Moth, which is a small class boat, and I think one of the best things I ever did was to go out in that, and I had dolphins with me that time.
Oh.
And because you had no motor, the dolphins would just go along with you.
So you were rowing.
Yeah. No, I was sailing.
Sailing.
This was one of the last boats that our grandfather did build, which was a rowboat.
So that's your grandfather with
No, that's actually our dad.
your dad with your brother John.
Yes.
Okay.
And so when Dad would take us out rowing, again, the Coast Guard was still active, and we got stopped because we didn't have any lights on the boat. Dad's like, hello, I'm the only boat out here rowing, but they did stop us and said it was too dark for us, to be out and stuff. The other thing we learned about our grandfather is that he was a Mason, and we were able to, I think we found in his obituary was the fact that he was a member of a lodge of Seal City, and from contacting them, they could tell us that he had transferred from the Kensington Lodge, which is where they live. So, again, going online and through the Masons, actually have a genealogy tab even, we could actually be provided information that he became a Mason in 1910 and that his occupation, was boat builder. And so I actually could provide to them where he transferred to, because Kensington didn't have that. So that helped them with their records, and in turn, to provide to Seattle that we knew that this was, when he earned the different levels and became a Mason. And then it's not as easy for Eastern Star. So we know her grandmother was a member of the Star chapter, but we don't know to what lodge actually that was connected. It's possibly the one in Tuckahoe because it is the Star Lodge, but he was not a member of that one. So still one of those things you like to
Yeah.
try to connect the dots on.